Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about boarding schools and study opportunities abroad in Switzerland and all the opportunities for Italian students. And today I will talk about this with a special guest, which is Mr. Shane Healy. Hi, Shane.
Hi, Antonella. Nice to meet you again.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Shane Healy. I'm the head of admissions at a boarding school in Switzerland. Our school is called the Swiss Boarding Schools Disentis and Zurich.
Okay. And well, of course, that's the reason why I invited you to talk about Swiss schools and boarding schools in Switzerland. And I will start from there actually. So, tell us a little bit about what we should expect when we talk about boarding schools in Switzerland. There are different types of schools. Tell about more. Tell about this.
Yeah, I think really a lot of people associate boarding schools with perhaps a small number of countries globally. I think the UK is very clearly one of those, the US to a certain extent. But a lot of people do consider Switzerland because there's a very long tradition of boarding here. And I think for families, that's part of the attraction of Switzerland. So there's a very long tradition. There are quite a large number of boarding schools here. And I think really for families, because there's such choice, they need to consider what's important to them. And so you mentioned, Antonella, there are different types of schools. Within Switzerland, there are several, and for the families, they need to decide what's the best fit for their son or daughter. And when I mean several, I'll give our own school as an example. We are an unusual school in the sense that we have two campuses. So we have what we call a mountain campus and a city campus, and they alone are very different from one another. Now, we're not unique in the world or Switzerland. There are several, let's call them city campuses. There are several mountain campuses. But for families, that's an important choice because the environment at both of those is very different. So if I use our own school as an example, we have a mountain campus in a place called Disentis. It's a small village of about 2,000 people in a very beautiful, picturesque Swiss Alp environment. Now, personally, I love to visit the campus. It's a beautiful place to be. But for each family, they need to decide whether that fits. Everything in the end is about two pieces of a jigsaw. If that doesn't fit, well, then the school is not the right place for them. And there are several, let's call them mountain campuses in Switzerland. A more urban environment, perhaps in a city where there's a little bit more, let's call it activity and more of a, let's say, an energy or a vibe. Perhaps that's something that families are looking for. But they're two very simple examples. What families also look at are whether it's co-ed or if it's a boys or girls only school. So that's another example of where families will decide, well, we want our daughter to only study at a girls' school. And there are some of those in Switzerland too. The program is also something of importance. In Switzerland, the two most popular would be the IB program, or in our case, we offer an international variant of the UK system, which is the GCSE and A levels. But even then, you're still looking at further subdivisions. Are extracurricular activities important? And if so, what are they? If it's sport, what kind of sports facilities does the school offer? If it's other activities, what tradition is there at the school? What facilities do they offer? What kind of environment? Is it a predominantly international school? Or is it majority, let's call it domestic students and small part international? Some schools have only international students and no domestic. Is it a mixture, in our case, of day students and boarding students, boarding only or a mixture? Really, the variety of types of school is very, very important. And you and I both know this, Antonella. Families don't know really what they're looking for. They think they know what they're looking for until you begin to speak to them.
You have to go further in deep to look at that. Yeah. Also, you mentioned several factors. There's also the language of teaching, because you might think that, some schools teach in French or German, some schools teach in English because they're more international in terms of environment. So that's another factor to take into consideration. Well, because you represent two schools, actually, so a town school and a mountain school. This is really interesting, I think, in the sense that we can help students to imagine their day, I would say. So probably there will be similarity in the way they have a typical day, a typical weekly day, and also differences of what they do in the in the free time. So can you tell something about this?
Yeah, this is where let's kind of bring it to basic levels. This is where geography makes a difference. So we are two campuses. I would call us one school with two campuses. So that we do call it the Swiss Boarding Schools, but in reality, when students apply, they apply to the school and then choose which of the two campuses they like. So certain things would have to remain quite consistent. The teaching, the classes, the subjects we offer, obviously the program is the same, the teaching is through English. So there's certain fundamentals that remain the same in both campuses. But the geography is important. So for example, our students based at the mountain campus, within 5 minutes on the school bus, they're at the ski slopes and they can go skiing. And at the moment, it's the perfect season. So definitely we take advantage of the opportunities we have. So facility-wise, it's important what we can offer. The geography I mentioned is very, very simple. But I mentioned, there are different types of schools and what's important to the families. We here in the city it's a city campus, but we have a lot of space. We're part of a very large campus where, for example, outside the window to my left here, we have a tennis academy with indoor tennis courts. There's a huge sports arena. There are 3 ice skating rinks. One of them is indoor, 2 outdoor. There's an athletics stadium here. Really, I think what's important for families is you need to physically visit the campus. You need to see it. You need to feel it and to get a sense of this fits me. And so certainly in our case, sport is very, very important to us. Outdoor activity is very, very important. I'm taking things for granted that studying hard and doing well in exams and attending classes, but most schools will be very good at that. That's really their core delivery. It's the extras I think are important. So I think there's no such thing as a typical day, Antonella. It really depends on what the school can offer. And in our case, certainly sport, outdoor activities, being very active is an important element.
And do you the student mix in your case, like let's say the city school and the mountain school students will do something together at any point of the school year, like, I don't know, weekends or holidays?
Typically, it's this time of year. So Switzerland there are so many things to talk about Switzerland. If I even remove our school out of the equation and just talk about the country, I think what's wonderful, because I'm not Swiss, I've been living here for almost 14 years. So I'm, I suppose, what you would call an expat who's still adapting to the culture of the country. But definitely where we create a community and where we have the opportunity to do so is at this time of the year. So I mentioned skiing. In Switzerland, they have typically one minimally. In our case, we have 2 weeks holiday, the Sportsferien, when you don't have to go skiing, but generally speaking, that's what families do. And at this time of the year, because the mountain campus is located at a ski resort, that's where we can get our students from both campuses to meet and do activities together.
Going back to academic, we mentioned that the type of academic program, it depends on the school. Of course, there will be IB, levels, even the local Switzerland diplomas in some cases, some schools. Your schools offer the A levels as a diploma. Why do you think the school decided to offer this program, this specific program, which is more linked to the UK usually than to other countries?
I think it's a good question, and we get asked this a lot, Antonella. Firstly, it was a very deliberate choice. It wasn't an accident that we decided to go with it. Switzerland, I compare programs in a very open way. The IB is, without question, the most popular program offered here at boarding schools in Switzerland. And there's a reason for that. Also, the IB comes from Geneva, it comes from Switzerland. A lot of the schools have adapted it, and the Swiss are very proud. So they've taken the IB on at a lot of schools. Sometimes as a school, you need to do things simply to be different. And so there are very few schools within Switzerland. I mean, there are some very, very good schools like ours that offer A levels, but not that many. And so that's one of the reasons we chose it is choice. I mean, the whole topic, the whole subject of choice is hugely important in the industry we work in. And we've talked about it, the different types of schools. We want to give people choice. A levels and IB are entirely different to one another in many, many ways. I kind of do it this way that IB has several subjects, whereas you focus a little bit more on a fewer subjects in A levels. But generally speaking, A levels is the biggest program globally. Historically, it's much bigger than IB, not within Switzerland, but globally, it's bigger. And so for families, they will be familiar with A levels. They will know it, they recognize it. And importantly, when families are choosing a school, they're thinking this is one step of several steps. The next step naturally is university. And they want to be sure that if their son or daughter studies at a school and the qualification they receive when they graduate is recognized at universities globally. And so for us, it's the recognition of A levels at university level that's super important for us.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in Italy, sometimes there's this misconception that because IB is international baccalaureate, that means that that's the only qualification which is recognized, which I usually tend, I mean, the very first thing that I say is like, that's not true because A levels have a very good reputation worldwide and it's accepted to get into universities everywhere, including Italy, because that's my market. So it's a very good point. One question that I typically get from parents is who and how who takes care of the students and how, meaning academically, but also like personal support. Like, of course, they're giving you their child, and then they expect the school that will take care of them. So how the school does this?
We do it. I think we do it a little bit differently to other schools. I mean, a lot of people in my position, Antonella, are parents themselves. I am. I have three daughters from age between 11 and 16. So I suppose naturally as a parent myself, I understand the concerns of parents. I realize the importance of the decision they're making. They're sending the most important thing in their lives out of their hands, out of their house, and to be in the care of someone else. So it's a huge decision for them. It's life-changing. And naturally, we have to, as a school, realize the importance of that. I think there are many ways to do it. One of the elements I feel which is important for families to choose a school is to do with the size of the school. So parents do choose schools for different reasons, but I think an element which is important of going to an international school or a private school, or certainly an international boarding school, is it tends to be a decision sometimes where if a family has a son or daughter at a public school and perhaps not performing to the best of their ability, this is very often a decision for families. Okay, I'm going to consider a boarding school internationally. And part of the reason for that is we have the resources. We realize the importance of it, of giving personalized attention. So a very simple example is the student-teacher ratio. The class size tends to be much smaller. So students do get more individual attention. But that's a very easy fix. It tends to be then the next level, which is at many schools, and in our case, we have a similar system where you have a personal tutor who academically will speak to you about academic performance. In general, are your grades remaining consistent or is there fluctuation? Why is there that fluctuation? Are there particular subjects you're struggling in? So it's very much about, I need to be able to communicate to someone and tell them how I'm performing, and if not well, why am I not performing well? And so sometimes I use this as an example quite often, a very human reaction to, let's call it underperformance, certainly as a student at school. I'm 50 years old and I sometimes still say what I'm about to tell you is, I didn't do very well at mathematics because my mathematics teacher wasn't very good, but I was wonderful at French because I'm very good at French. So we tend to say we're wonderful and that's why we performed well, but we didn't perform well because it was somebody else's fault. Normally, that isn't the case. There's something else there. And so what we offer as a school, and other schools do the same, is you need to have a one-to-one on a regular basis to kind of monitor not only academic performance, but how is the student doing? It's not always a case of, let's call it lack of academic performance is because of simply struggling at the subject. Very often there are some other things going on there, perhaps that the student is struggling with. It might be bullying. It might be, as a boarding student, having difficulty living in another country, being away from home. So I think for us, and we're not different, again, this is a very common thing, is you need to have open channels of communication and make sure that the student is in an environment where they feel comfortable, they feel safe, and they can communicate exactly what they're feeling.
I agree. I think, well, I'm not a psychologist. I've been reading a lot about like teaching and things like that. And I think that in the recent years, it is now a thing that we know that if a person is feeling like supported, welcome, is feeling happy in a general way, I mean, then the performance in general improves. And this applies to schools, to work, I mean, everywhere, I suppose. If you go to an environment where you're unhappy, you're not considered as a person, I mean, why you even make the effort? Because of course you don't, I mean, even if you are very bright and very clever, it doesn't work. It cannot work on the longer term. So that's really important what you said. So you mix kind of academic and what in the UK they call the pastoral care, like personal support. Like when you said the one-to-one, it means like you do checking in with the students every now and then to see what's going on.
We have different levels of support, Antonella. So on an academic level, we have what we call a tutor, personal tutor. Then on a more holistic level, this is where I feel the school is different. We have what we call a personal coach. Now, the coach isn't, I'm not sure if coach sometimes is the correct term to use. It's not on a level of training or anything like that, because we do have a lot of high-level athletes. We have a very special program at the school dedicated to high-level athletes. But the coach is somebody who does focus more on the holistic side and less on academic. Of course, the tutor, the responsibility there is on academic performance. But the coach is more, let me take a step back and I'll tell you how it works. So when students join the school, within a few weeks of joining, they choose an adult member of staff. It can be a member of the academic team or none. It can be somebody who isn't a teacher, but someone that they have developed a sense of trust with, that they like and they feel they can communicate with. And the coach's job really is to keep regular meetings. It really depends between the student and the coach, whether it's every week, every fortnight, but it's really a how are you? Of course, because it's a school, the academic side will come in and the environment and other students and classes and how they're performing. But sometimes it's expectations of mom and dad. Sometimes it's, I have a particular issue with another student in the class, but perhaps it's bullying, perhaps it's the food. You know, there are things that you simply don't plan for. And sometimes if students don't communicate it, you think everything is fine. So we do have everything from we've university counselor, we've a head of academics, we have our tutor, and then we have the personal coach. So what we try to make sure is that if the students are struggling with anything, that they have at least one person that they can privately communicate to.
Yeah, well, that's good. Like yesterday, I talked to one of my girls, like one of my students in the UK, and she said, like, I wish that, I mean, everything was fine, but it was like, of course, first semester. And it's like, now that teachers understood that for me, it's a challenge to get used to the program. Now I feel better because, like, you know, she's doing her best, but now she knows that teachers know that she's doing her best. So if she struggles, it's not because she's not interested, but because it's taking time. So as you said, you don't plan for that. I mean, you go there with the best expectations and ideas, but still, it's a new program, new country, new school, new way of studying, especially, or new also relationship with the teachers, because in Italy we have a different way to approach teachers. I mean, large classes, teachers don't have the time and sometimes the willingness to do extra support. So it's a very different way. And students are not used to talk with the adults this way.
Yeah.
So they need also sometimes to get used to the fact that they can do this. They can ask for support. They can say what's wrong without being judged, without being like
Exactly.
overlooked about this. So,
And I think, Antonella, an important element of what you and I both do is to kind of set realistic expectations on everything. Sometimes families do decide to send their son or daughter abroad to an international boarding school with an expectation, which is that they're going to go to Harvard. And you can't promise that. We have to be realistic about, yes, it's a good choice for most students. I mean, it's a difficult choice, but in general, it's probably a good decision. But the reality is that we won't all end up in Oxford, Cambridge, or Harvard. We will do the very best we can and provide the environment to get the best out of your child. But we can't make promises that are unrealistic. And sometimes that's what comes out in these conversations is, I feel under pressure. I need to achieve the following. And if I don't achieve it, there's, consequences. And that's where we need to be honest and open. And if these conversations come out and we realize that there's that kind of difficulty, it's ultimately, I think, down to communication. And as long as everyone is realistic and honest and open and communicates what's happening, then the best is probably what you're going to get.
yeah. And also, I think because you said, of course, it's difficult. I mean, you're standing away, you're trusting someone else that they will do their best to support your child. Then you have to trust these people. I mean, you have to trust the teachers and the school staff and everything. They know, they have experience and knowledge and everything in place to make also decisions which would not be the ones you expect, like you said, Harvard and Cambridge. Of course, I mean, everyone expects that they are the best options. Maybe they're not all the only best option, honestly. But we must trust the teachers and the schools and everything, that they know that that specific student might not be happy in Harvard and Cambridge and MIT, but maybe another school, another university, or even another study pathway would be even better for the child. Because probably that child was never aware of alternatives. Or no one asked him or her, do you really want to do medicine, let's say? Not because your mom and dad are doctors, but because maybe you're not really interested and you were too shy to say, maybe not. So I think trusting them, let's say, for example, sometimes happens to me that it takes a bit more time than expected for a student to adapt to a school. So maybe we are planning for 2 years and then one additional year is needed for whatever reason. Not because the student is not studying, but because it requires time. So we need to trust the school that if they say the students need an additional year, it's for their best. It's not because they want an additional tuition fee paid. That's not the point. I mean, schools don't need that. It's because for their child, they find it's the best option. So I agree with you, like. And while we're talking about universities and applications and careers, so how the schools, in this case, your schools, how do you support students when it comes to think about careers and university applications and all the process?
So this is a subject I talk about quite a lot. So I'm almost 30 years in the industry, and part of my background is at the university level. In fact, quite a lot of my background is at the university level. So I'm very aware of what the institutions are looking for candidates coming from high school into university. And I think definitely certainly the international schools are very good at this. They do have, and in the end, it's about resourcing. They will have, like we do, university counselors who will speak to students. It depends on the school. Normally, at least 2 years before they finish. Certainly, it gets more intense in the final year and a half. And it's about, again, it's about fit. It's my experience is dealing with families is similar to what we just talked about. It's already decided that my son or daughter will go to this university. But sometimes they haven't even decided what program at that university they want their son or daughter to study. And I try and it's just a change of mindset that they need to flip. And so university counselors at schools are very good at this. You need to think about the program first. university afterwards. But think about the subjects you're good at, that you like, that you focus on, what's needed at the particular program that you're applying for. You know, are you actually taking the correct subjects that are required to study at that particular program? So it's really a change of mindset for students and families. It's university will come. We'll figure that bit first, but let's figure out what's the program that's a good fit for you. And A levels is really designed for that. A levels, because of the subject choice, you really focus on particular subjects. So in our case, when you do A levels, you do AS and A levels in the final 2 years, you really need to start thinking before then about what it is you want to study at university, because your subject choice is very important then before you attend. So we start definitely at least 3 years before they attend university, the process of thinking, the process of subject choice, not university choice, but definitely the program. So yeah, again, I think we do a very good job at that, but most institutions who are international schools also do so. They have dedicated, professionally hired permanent staff, and that's their function, that's their role, to communicate with the universities, to communicate with the student, to communicate with the families. And sometimes it's a bit of a shock for the families that they realize, well, actually, my son, you mentioned Antonella, my son isn't going to be a doctor, he's going to be an environmental scientist. And it's probably the right decision ultimately.
Because maybe this is something happening, especially well in Italy. I don't know some other, I don't know state schools in other countries, but because we have set curriculum like in the terms of high schools, and we don't really do activities in terms of career and orientation in school. So the only options that students can see at the age of 16, 17 years old are either their parents' professions, some relatives or family friends, if they even meet them, and the few options that they've been learning about. There are so many, not just only careers, but also factors to consider. Like, well, I also am a career consultant. It's like no one is only doing one career in life now. So it's more like, what do you like? And then you will find out what to do with what you like and what you studied. Then I want to do this, because probably you don't even like the profession at the very end, but you have to do the most, take the most of what you studied, what you like, what is more suitable for you, as you said, the best fit. And that's really difficult to make parents understanding, because of course we are older, and then we probably come from a different economic setting. But that's something to take into consideration. So like you are deciding what to study at university, not what you'll be doing for your entire life, not necessarily.
Yeah.
That's something also that's really important.
And I think definitely we need to always, you and I, but we need to speak to parents at quite an early stage about this. You know, if you say to, we'll use the example of the doctor again, because I have these similar conversations, and you say, okay, your son would like to be a doctor. Have you asked him about it? And very often you say, well, we've told him, is kind of the message. And then why? And sometimes that's where parents get stuck, is the why. Because they know the how. The how is you go to school, you get good grades, you go to university, you study medicine, you become a doctor. But the why is very important. And I think what's hugely important, and this for my generation, certainly, you know, parents of a certain age, the next thing I'm going to touch on is very difficult for them to comprehend, which is there are certain professions which will no longer exist, even 5 to 10 years from now. I worked at a business school for many years, and the school dropped the accounting major because they realized that eventually that profession won't exist. And it was increasingly becoming unpopular. Families need to think about the future. I graduated about 100 years ago from university, but 20 years after my graduation from my university, myself and a group of friends, about 20 of us met 20 years later after we graduated. And basically nobody was studying something that was directly related to what they'd studied 20 years before. But that is a very simple example. It's increasing much faster now. So for parents, of course, they're concerned about the future of their child. They're concerned about their welfare to make sure they have, I'm going to put this in inverted commas, a good job.
Of course, yes.
But we don't know what that is anymore. It's really to give them the foundation that they do make a clear choice, what happens afterwards sometimes is out of our control.
Yeah, I did a career consultation like pathway with a girl. Well, we finished it a couple of months ago, and she was like, please don't talk about what I want to do in my life. Just try to decide together what I can do in 3 to 5 years time, because if I think about my own life, it would be like too much anxiety for me. And I find that makes sense, because like start from here, then you'll see. You said no one of your university friends did the same. Like it was the same for me. Like we did international marketing, but then while I'm doing this job, I studied something more, and afterwards some people have their own business, some other people have their own business, let's say language or insurance or hotel management. So it's different. Like, yes, we had the foundation of marketing and business, but then we added on several other knowledge and experiences, and then we ended up in something that we like, plus what we studied. That it's not, we're not working in a company on the marketing department. No one of us really. So yeah, that was not the point. Really.
I agree. I'm exactly the same. I ended up studying something at university, which I liked, I enjoyed. I loved the university I attended. I really enjoyed the program I did. I really had no idea what I was going to do next, but I studied, it was called European Studies, so it was a lot of different elements, plus language. I studied French at university, but that perfectly suited me. What type of job afterwards? Well, I had absolutely no idea. And as my career has turned out, I loved to travel. I was interested in culture. I've taught culture. I've traveled the world. There was kind of a natural progression of the skills I learned, not actually the subjects I studied, but the skills I learned. So life will take over. It's we can't control it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like life will think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And before we go back to boarding schools conversation, because you mentioned that you work for other like institutions, and then you've been working the international education, no, maybe not just education. As a father and as a profession with an international profile, what would you say is, why would you say it's worth to invest in a study abroad experience, investing, meaning time, effort, money, whatever it takes, I mean, for parents?
I could talk about this for a long, long time. I think, generally speaking, it's not the easy option to do that. I have been working in the industry since 1997. I've lived in France, I've lived in Greece, in Ireland, now in Switzerland for the last 13 years. Doing that isn't easy. It definitely takes you out of your comfort zone. You have to learn a new language. You have to adapt to a new culture. So I'm 50 years old. You know, when you're 15, going to a boarding school abroad, it's a similar experience. It's difficult. This is not an easy decision. But generally speaking, when you make difficult decisions about things that are, I'm going to use my daughter's words, it's hard. Of course it's hard. But the benefit of doing something like that repeats itself. You get so much benefit out of it. If you don't want to move, if you want to stay in the same place, you'll probably experience what you expect. When you do make difficult decisions, which involves traveling and living abroad, experiencing new things, experiencing new people, the benefit of that is you will probably continue doing so. I know at university, they're looking for profiles of students who will fit not only their university, because universities are very international. The environment there is very international. But if we think professionally, I've worked with people from every corner of the globe, and having the opportunity to travel and live abroad and be experienced to cultures at a young age means that this is very normal. This is a very comfortable environment for you, whereas someone who hasn't done that, it's difficult. So I think it's difficult. It's a difficult choice, a difficult decision for families. But generally speaking, it's the right one. I've never heard anyone say that they regretted having an international environment, be it professionally, academically, or otherwise. I think you only gain. And I think if you look at world politics, I think the more we can experience of how other people think, the better the world can be.
Yeah, and also it comes to my mind, like I talked to an expat coach some time ago, and she was saying that not every age is the same. Like if you decide, because that's a question, like some parents is like, why we don't wait for university, or after university, my daughter would think about it. But with daughters, sometimes that's a conversation, unfortunately. It's not the same because you said it's hard, but at 15 years old, when you go to boarding school, of course it's hard, but you have all this environment like extracurricular, friends, similar age and everything that you make friends, your time goes by, and then you mean it's easier, I would say in a way, it's hard, but easier. If you go away after 25 years old, 30 years old, on your own, without university, without like, I mean, it's even harder, and maybe it still is not the same because you're an adult, so you're not adapting in the same way. Well, I see it myself when I travel now, and I traveled 20 years ago. It's like now it's more, I have to pack, I have to do this and that. That's different from my own. I mean, it's being old. But when you're a teenager, everything is fun. Like, so the fun part helps you a lot. So you don't even notice that you are building skills and you are building resilience, but you are. So I think it's not the same. Not every age is the same. I agree with that person.
Yeah.
Better the younger age, if you can.
I think so. The difficult decision element shouldn't scare people, and certainly shouldn't scare. You're right. The younger the kids, the students, they adapt to things much faster than we would. There's no doubt. I came to Switzerland not having skied, and I tried to ski. I now finally have mastered it, but you know, it's embarrassing to see 4-year-old kids skiing past you and they think there's something wrong with you. I used to teach culture at a business school for many years, and a very important element of this, the hard decisions I'm talking about, certainly when it comes to culture, part of the reason that there's difficulties with culture is it's the fear of the unknown. And people are not some people are not comfortable with doing things that they don't feel, that it's unknown to them. They're afraid of it. But once you overcome that, it's easy. So yeah, these are difficult decisions. It is hard, but you realize once you start this process, once you overcome, it's a mentality, it's a mental block. Once you overcome that, the thing that I think we don't talk about enough at boarding school and education industry is it's so much fun. Generally speaking, the decision to go abroad to an international boarding school is a good decision. The results are positive. Your child will become a very different person, but they will have lots of fun along the way. Most of us forget what we learned at school and university, but we remember the people we went to school and university with, and friendships remain for a lifetime. So I would say be less afraid, be open to the unknown.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much as we approach the end of the conversation, I will ask you the big question, which is why, in your opinion, like families should consider Switzerland for boarding school education? Why they should do the investment? Because it is an investment, I mean, of course.
Switzerland has a lot of things to offer. And I think I can speak openly about this. Living in Switzerland for 13 years with a Swiss wife, my kids have basically grown up here, but I'm not Swiss, and so I can look from the outside, so to speak. There are wonderful things this country has to offer in general, but from an education point of view, I really describe this country as kind of the cradle of boarding schools. It's just got such a long tradition of doing it. So they have within the schools, and our mountain campus has been a school for almost 800 years. There's this wonderful history and tradition and culture of boarding and how to do it correctly and the value of it. You know, on a different level, it's extremely safe. Politically, economically, it's very stable, it's very secure. But I think people know that. People associate Switzerland for many things. But when it's a decision about school, safety, tradition, history, these things are terribly important. The strange thing I would say about Switzerland is we're so good at it here that students will consider Switzerland for boarding, but they may not then consider university here. They think it's so good at boarding, it prepares you for anywhere in the world. So I think that's why Switzerland is so successful in the boarding school side of things, is that it's a preparation for the rest of your life in any other part of the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like this as a conclusion. So thank you very much for this conversation, which I'm sure it's a very good introduction to Switzerland boarding schools and also to your school, Disentis and Zurich, Swiss boarding schools. And of course, for everyone listening, if you like to know more about these opportunities, what both me and Shane are available to talk about this in a meeting and individually and so on. So thanks, Shane, again for joining me.
Thanks very much, Antonella. I enjoyed it.
And see you for next video about study abroad opportunities.
Great. Look forward to it. Thanks a lot.